This is Musashi by Eiji Yoshikawa. Book 1, Earth, first chapter, The Little Bell. Takezo lay among the corpses. There were thousands of them. The whole world's gone crazy, he thought dimly. A man might as well be a dead leaf floating in the autumn breeze. He himself looked like one of the lifeless bodies surrounding him. He tried to raise his head, but could only lift it a few inches from the ground. He couldn't remember ever feeling so weak. How long have I been here, he wondered. Flies came buzzing around his head. He wanted to brush them away, but couldn't even muster the energy to raise his arm. It was stiff, almost brittle, like the rest of his body. I must have been out for quite a while, he thought, wiggling one finger at a time. Little did he know he was wounded, with 2 bullets lodged firmly in his thigh. Low, dark clouds shifted ominously across the sky. The night before, sometime between midnight and dawn, a blinding rain had drenched the plain of Sekigahara. It was now past noon on the 15th of the 9th month of 1600. Though the typhoon had passed, now and then fresh torrents of rain would fall on the corpses and onto Takezo's upturned face. Each time it came, he'd open and close his mouth like a fish, trying to drink in the droplets. It's like the water they wipe a dying man's lips with, he reflected, savoring each bit of moisture. His head was numb, his thoughts the fleeting shadows of delirium. His side had lost, he knew that much. Kobayakawa Hideaki, supposedly an ally, had been secretly in league with the Eastern Army, and when he turned onto Ishide Mitsunari's troops at twilight, the tide of battle turned too. He then attacked the armies of other commanders, Ukita, Shimazu, and Konishi, and the collapse of the Western Army was complete. In only half a day's fighting, the question of who would henceforth rule the country was settled. It was Tokugawa Ieyasu, the powerful Edo daimyo. Images of his sister and the old villagers floated before his eyes. I'm dying, he thought, without a tinge of sadness. Is this what it's really like? He felt drawn to the peace of death, like a child mesmerized by a flame. Suddenly, one of the nearby corpses raised its head. Takezo! The images of his mind ceased. As if awakened from the dead, he turned his head toward the sound. The voice, he was sure, was that of his best friend. With all his strength, he raised himself slightly, squeezing out a whisper barely audible above the pelting rain. Matahachi, is that you? Then he collapsed, lay still, and listened. Takezo, are you really alive? Yes, alive, he shouted in a sudden outburst of bravado. And you? You'd better not die either. Don't you dare. His eyes were wide open now, and a smile played faintly about his lips. Not me, no sir. Gasping for breath, crawling on his elbows and dragging his legs stiffly behind him, Matahachi inched his way toward his friend. He made a grab for Takezo's hand, but only caught his small finger with his own. As childhood friends, they'd often seal promises with this gesture. He came closer and gripped the whole hand. I can't believe you're all right, too. We must be the only survivors. Don't speak too soon. I haven't tried to get up yet. I'll help you. Let's get out of here. Suddenly, Takezo pulled Matahachi to the ground and growled, Play dead! More trouble coming! The ground began to rumble like a cauldron. Peeking through their arms, they watched the approaching whirlwind close in on them. Then, they were nearer, lines of jet-black horsemen hurtling directly toward them. The bastards! They're back! Exclaimed Matahachi, raising his knee as if preparing for a sprint. Takezo seized his ankle, nearly breaking it, and yanked him to the ground. In a moment, the horses were flying past them, hundreds of muddy, lethal hooves galloping in formation, riding roughshod over the fallen samurai. Battle cries on their lips, their armor and weapons clinking and clanking. The riders came on and on. Matahachi lay on his stomach, eyes closed, hoping against hope they would not be trampled, but Takezo stared unblinkingly upward. The horses passed so close they could smell their sweat. Then it was over. Miraculously, they were uninjured and undetected, and for several minutes both remained silent in disbelief. Saved again, exclaimed Takezo, reaching his hand out to Matahachi. Still hugging the ground, Matahachi slowly turned his head to show a broad, slightly trembling grin. Somebody's on our side, that's for sure, he said huskily. The two friends helped each other, with great difficulty, to their feet. Slowly they made their way across the battlefield to the safety of the wooded hills, hobbling along with arms around each other's shoulders. There they collapsed, but after a rest began foraging for food. For 2 days they subsisted on wild chestnuts and edible leaves in the sodden hollows of Mount Ibuki. This kept them from starving, but Takezo's stomach ached, and Matahachi's bowels tormented him. No food could fill him, no drink quench his thirst, but even he felt his strength returning bit by bit. The storm on the 15th marked the end of the fall of typhoons. Now, only 2 nights later, a cold white moon glared grimly down from a cloudless sky. They both knew how dangerous it was to be out on the road in the glaring moonlight, their shadows looming like silhouette targets in clear view of any patrol searching for stragglers. The decision to risk it had been Takezo's. With Matahachi in such misery, saying he'd rather be captured than continue trying to walk, there really didn't seem to be much choice. They had to move on, but it was also clear that they had to find a place to lie low and rest. They made their way slowly in what they thought was the direction of a small town of Tarui. Can you make it? Takezo asked repeatedly. He held his friend's arm around his shoulder to help him along. Are you all right? It was the labored breathing that worried him. You want to rest? I'm all right. Matahachi tried to sound brave, but his face was paler than the moon above them. Even with his lance for a walking stick, he could barely put one foot in front of the other. He'd been apologizing abjectly over and over. I'm sorry, Takezo. I know it's me who's slowing us down. I'm really sorry. The first few times Takezo had simply brushed this off with, forget it. Eventually, when they stopped to rest, he turned to his friend and burst out, Look, I'm the one who should be apologizing. I'm the one who got you into this in the first place. Remember? Remember how I told you my plan? How I was finally going to do something that would really have impressed my father? I've never been able to stand the fact that to his dying day he was sure I'd never amount to anything. I was going to show him. Ha! Takezo's father, Munisai, had once served under Lord Shimen of Iga. As soon as Takezo heard that Ishida Mitsunari was raising an army, he was convinced that the chance of a lifetime had finally arrived. His father had been a samurai. Wasn't it only natural that he would be made one too? He ached to enter the fray, to prove his mettle, to have word spread like wildfire through the village that he had decapitated an enemy general. He had wanted desperately to prove that he was somebody to be reckoned with, to be respected, not just the village troublemaker. Takezo reminded Matahachi of all this, and Matahachi nodded. I know, but I felt the same way. It wasn't just you. Takezo went on. I wanted you to come with me because we've always done everything together. But didn't your mother carry on something awful, yelling and telling everyone I was crazy and no good? And your fiancé Otsu, and my sister, and everyone else crying and saying village boys should stay in the village. Oh, maybe they had their reasons. We are both only sons, and if we get ourselves killed, there's no one else to carry on the family names. But who cares? Is that any way to live? They had slipped out of the village unnoticed and were convinced that no further barrier lay between themselves and the honors of battle. When they reached the Shimen encampment, however, they came face to face with the realities of war. They were told straight away they would not be made samurai, not overnight, nor even in a few weeks, no matter who their fathers had been. To Ishida and the other generals, Takezo and Matahachi were a pair of country bumpkins, little more than children who have happened to have gotten their hands on a couple of lances. The best they could wangle was to be able to stay on as common foot soldiers. Their responsibilities, if they could be called that, consisted of carrying weapons, rice kettles, and other utensils, cutting grass, working on the road gangs, and occasionally going out as scouts. Samurai, said Takezo. What a joke. General's head. I didn't even get near an enemy samurai, let alone a general. Well, at least it's all over. Now what are we going to do? I can't leave you here all alone. If I did, I could never face your mother or Otsu again. Takezo, I don't blame you for the mess we're in. It wasn't your fault we lost. If anybody's to blame, it's that two-faced Kobayakawa. I'd really like to get my hands on him. I'd kill this son of a bitch. A couple of hours later, they were standing on the edge of a small plain, gazing out over a sea of reed-like miscanthus, battered and broken by the storm. No houses, no lights. There were lots of corpses here, too, lying just as they had fallen. The head of one rested in some tall grass. Another was on its back in a small stream. Still another was entangled grotesquely with a dead horse. The rain had washed the blood away, and in the moonlight the dead flesh looked like fish scales. All around them was the lonely autumn litany of bell rings and crickets. A stream of tears cleared a white path down Matahachi's grimy face. He heaved a sigh of a very sick man. Takezo, if I die, will you take care of Otsu? What are you talking about? I feel like I'm dying. Takezo snapped. Well, if that's the way you feel, you probably will. He was exasperated, wishing his friend were stronger so he can lean on him once in a while, not physically, but for encouragement. Come on, Matahachi, don't be such a crybaby. My mother has people to look after her, but Otsu's all alone in the world. Always has been. I feel so sorry for her, Takezo. Promise you'll take care of her if I'm not around. Get a hold of yourself. People don't die from diarrhea. Sooner or later, we're going to find a house, and when we do, I'll put you to bed and get you some medicine for you. Now stop all this blubbering about dying. A little farther on, they came to a place where the pile of lifeless bodies made it look as if a whole division had been wiped out. By this time, they were callous to the sight of gore. Their glazed eyes took in the scene with cold indifference, and they stopped to rest again. While they were catching their breath, they heard something move among the corpses. Both of them shrank back in fright, instinctively crouching down with their eyes peeled and senses alerted. The figure made a quick darting movement, like that of a surprised rabbit. As their eyes focused, they saw that whoever it was squatting close to the ground. Thinking at first it was a stray samurai, they braced themselves for a dangerous encounter. But to their amazement, the fierce warrior turned out to be a young girl. She seemed to be about 13 or 14 and wore a kimono with rounded sleeves. The narrow obi around her waist, though patched in places, was of a gold brocade. There among the corpses she presented a bizarre sight indeed. She looked over and stared at them, suspiciously, with shrewd cat-like eyes. Takezo and Matahachi were both wondering the same thing. What on earth could bring a young girl to a ghost-ridden, corpse-strewn field in the dead of night? For a time, they both simply stared back at her. Then Takezo said, "Who are you?" She blinked a couple of times, got to her feet, and sped away. "Stop!" shouted Takezo. "I just want to ask you a question. Don't go!" But gone she was, like a flash of lightning in the night. The sound of a small bell receded eerily into the darkness. Could it have been a ghost? Takezo mused aloud as he stared vacantly into the thin mist. Matahachi shivered and forced a laugh. "If there were any ghosts around, I think they'd be one of those soldiers, don't you?" "I wish I hadn't scared her away," said Takezo. "There's got to be a village around here somewhere. She could have given us directions." They went on and climbed the nearer of the two hills ahead of them. In the hollow on the other side was the marsh that stretched south from Mount Fua, and a light, only half a mile away. When they approached the farmhouse, they got the impression that it wasn't of the run-of-the-mill variety. For one thing, it was surrounded by a thick dirt wall. For another, its gate verged on being grandiose, or at least the remains of the gate, for it was old and badly in need of repair. Takezo went up to the door and rapped lightly. "Is anybody home?" Getting no answer, he tried again. "Sorry to bother you at this hour, but my friend here is sick. We don't want to cause any trouble. He just needs some rest." They heard whispering inside, and presently the sound of someone coming to the door. "You're stragglers from Sekigahara, aren't you?" A voice belonged to a young girl. "That's right," said Takezo. "We were under Lord Shimadaviga." "Go away! If you're found around here, we'll be in trouble." "Look, we're very sorry to bother you like this, but we've been walking a long time. My friend needs some rest, that's all, and please go away." "All right, if you really want us to, but couldn't you give my friend some medicine? His stomach is in such bad shape, it's hard for us to keep moving." "Well, I don't know." After a moment or two, they heard footsteps and a little tinkling sound receding into the house, growing fainter and fainter. Just then, they noticed the face. It was in a side window, a woman's face, and it had been watching them all along. "Akemi," she called, "let them in. They're foot soldiers. The Tokugawa patrols aren't going to be wasting time on them. They're nobodies." Akemi opened the door, and the woman who introduced herself as Oko came and listened to Takezo's story. It was agreed that they could have the woodshed to sleep in. To quiet his bowels, Matahachi was given magnolia charcoal powder and thin rice scallions in it. Over the next few days, he slept almost without interruption, while Takezo, sitting vigil by his side, used cheap spirits to treat the bullet wounds in his thigh. One evening, about a week later, Takezo and Matahachi sat chatting. "They must have a trade of some kind," Takezo remarked. "I couldn't care less what they do. I'm just glad they took us in." But Takezo's curiosity was aroused. "The mother's not so old," he went on. "It's strange, the two of them living alone here in the mountains. Don't you think that girl looks a little like Otsu? There is something about her that puts me in mind of Otsu, but I don't think they really look alike. They're both nice looking, that's about it. What do you suppose she was doing the first time we saw her, creeping around all those corpses in the middle of the night? It didn't seem to bother her at all. I could still see it. Her face was as calm and serene as those dolls they make in Kyoto. What a picture." Matahachi motioned for him to be quiet. "Shh, I hear her bell." Akemi's light knock on the door sounded like a tapping of a woodpecker. "Matahachi, Takezo," she called softly. "Yes? It's me." Takezo got up and undid the lock. She came in carrying a tray of medicine and food and asked them how they were. "Much better, thanks to you and your mother. Mother said that even if you feel better, you shouldn't talk too loud or go outside." Takezo spoke for the two of them. "We're really sorry to put you to so much trouble." "Oh, that's okay. You just have to be careful. Ishida Mitsunari and some of the other generals haven't been caught yet. They're keeping a close watch on this area, and the roads are crawling with Tokugawa troops." "They are? So even though you're only foot soldiers, Mother said that if we're caught hiding you, we'll be arrested." "We won't make a sound," Takezo promised. "I'll even cover Matahachi's face with a rag if he snores too loudly." Akemi smiled, turned to go, and said, "Good night. I'll see you in the morning." "Wait," said Matahachi. "Why don't you hang around and talk a while?" "I can't." "Why not?" "Mother'd be angry." "Why worry about her? How old are you?" 16. "Small for your age, aren't you? Thanks for telling me." "Where's your father?" "I don't have one anymore." "Sorry." "Then how do you live?" "We make moxa, that medicine you burn on your skin to get rid of pain." "Yes, the moxa from hereabouts is famous. In spring we cut mugwort in Mount Ibuki. In summer we dry it, and in fall and winter we make it into moxa. We sell it in Tarui. People come from all over just to buy it." "I guess you don't need a man around to do that." "Well, if that's all you wanted to know, I better get going." "Hold on, just another second," said Takezo. "I have one more question." "Well?" "The other night, the night we came here, we saw a girl out on the battlefield, and she looked just like you. That was you, wasn't it?" Akemi turned quickly and opened the door. What were you doing out there? She slammed the door behind her, and as she ran to the house, the little bell rang out in a strange, erratic rhythm.